Hello, welcome back to Inform New Hampshire. My name is Rich Merrett, your host. Before we get started with the show, I'd like to do what I do every week and ask you to continue to say your prayers for the release of Jerry DeLemus. He's an innocent man, been in prison for over 2.5 years. So keep him in your prayers and thoughts. Secondarily, I believe that the National Liberty Alliance.org is one organization that's attempting to free us all by helping the sheriffs in this country educate them. So they're trying to print these books. The printing cost and the mailing cost to send them out to all the sheriffs, they need help with. If you would care to do that, please send a contribution, nationallibertyalliance.org. Check out their website. I think you'll find it pretty incredible. With that, I'd like to get into the show very quickly. We've got a couple films basically to show you what slavery is like in America. And I think that these two particular videos will show it to you pretty plainly. See if you see any similarities between Mr. Jones and Mr. Johnson and our government. With that, we'll go right into the first video. Thank you.
Mr. Jones owned a cotton plantation and many slaves. One day he was talking to the owner of the plantation next to his, and Mr. Jones was lamenting the fact that times were tough. He was having to work his slaves harder than ever, and was having trouble with some of them being disobedient or trying to run away. The other plantation owner said he knew someone who could help.
Day 1.
One day Mr. Jones called his slaves together so a man named Mr. Smith could talk to them. Before beginning, Mr. Smith whispered to Mr. Jones, "Whatever I say, do not contradict me or interfere, and I promise you your slave troubles will end." "My name is Mr. Smith," he said to the slaves, "and this may be the happiest day of your lives. From today forward, you will no longer be slaves, but free men." Mr. Jones was so shocked he started to step forward, but Mr. Smith gestured for him to remain silent. He did, only because the other plantation owner had spoken so highly of Mr. Smith's skills. "You are no longer the property of Mr. Jones," Mr. Smith continued. "You are free. No more would you be forced to labor for the benefit of Mr. Jones. Now you can work for yourselves." Now the slaves were all murmuring and looking at each other. Many were smiling, many were looking puzzled. "In fact, you are now free to leave the plantation whenever you want," Mr. Smith said. "However, since we are surrounded by other plantations, if you leave, some other plantation owner will likely claim you as his own the moment you set foot on his property. So I urge you not to risk your newfound freedom by doing something so foolish. Instead, I suggest that you stay here, no longer as slaves, but as willing participants and part owners of this plantation. Yes, this is now your plantation." Mr. Jones bit his tongue to keep from objecting. "For now, we might as well leave Mr. Jones in charge," said Mr. Smith, "since he is the only one with any experience at running a plantation, which is quite a complicated thing to manage. But he will no longer be your master, but just another worker on the plantation. In fact, he will now be using his organizational and management skills to serve you. Whatever problems you may have had with him before, you are now all equals, and you need each other to make this work. If we all cooperate and work together, we can all reap the benefits together. In honor of this happy occasion, I present you this new symbol of togetherness and cooperation, this flag, which shall be the emblem of the new, free Jones plantation." He held up the new flag, but most of those listening were still too amazed to respond. "And this shall be our motto," Mr. Smith announced. "We work together as free men for our mutual benefit, pledging our allegiance to the Jones plantation, which stands for prosperity, liberty, and justice for all. To celebrate, everyone has the rest of the day off. Enjoy your freedom, do as you please, and be back here tomorrow morning, bright and early, so that we may begin work on this great and noble new endeavor as equal free men." Finally convinced that Mr. Smith was serious, the former slaves applauded and cheered.
Day 2.
"We all want this plantation to do well," Mr. Smith said at the beginning of the next meeting, "so we can all share in the benefits. We all know that it takes a lot of effort to make a cotton plantation work. Just because you're all free doesn't mean you can stop working. In fact, since you're now working for yourselves, I expect you to work even harder than ever before, but now with pride and joy, knowing that you're working for yourselves. Of course, there still have to be rules. If everyone just does whatever he wants, the plantation won't produce anything. This experiment will fail and we'll all starve. You should be thankful that Mr. Jones has agreed to stay on to lend his knowledge and skills to this endeavor, and I trust you will all do your own part to make this work. Several of you have been chosen to act as project supervisors to manage different aspects of the operation, to make sure everyone is doing his assigned job, to make sure that the rules are followed, and so on. The rest of you may head out to the fields to start your first day of work as free men.
Day 3.
The next morning, Mr. Smith had a grim expression on his face as the daily meeting began. "I have an unpleasant duty to do today," he said. "Yesterday, Charles was caught keeping some of the cotton he picked, presumably to sell for his own personal profit. That is against the rules. That is stealing. For that, Charles must be punished." 2 men tied Charles to the whipping post. "I take no joy in this," Mr. Smith continued, "but you must understand, if we do not maintain order, if we do not have rules that we all abide by, then the plantation will fail, and we will all suffer." The whip cracked against Charles' back. "But if we all pitch in for the common good, then we can all prosper. Being free doesn't mean you should be selfish and greedy. We must each do our assigned duties and obey the rules, and then we can all benefit, and each of you will receive your appropriate share of the profits." A young man named Samuel stepped forward. "But if you and Mr. Jones decide the rules and whip us if we disobey, how is that any different from what we had before?" "How can you say that?" Mr. Smith asked. "I'm shocked. You were a slave before, and now you're free. Things still need to be managed and organized by those best qualified to do so. Do you know how to run a plantation, Samuel?" "Well, no," he answered. "But if we're free, why do we get no say in what the rules are and how things work?" "I'm surprised at your ingratitude," Mr. Smith answered. "None of you know how a plantation is run, so you're in no position to be making decisions about how things are done here. You don't seem to appreciate all the things that Mr. Jones provides for you, from protecting you from all the outside threats that you know nothing about, those who would come here, capture and enslave you if not for Mr. Jones' protection, to making sure that you all have food and housing, tools to work with, that you're cared for when sick and injured, and so on. There wouldn't be a plantation at all, no cotton to pick, no land to plant and harvest, if not for him. You should be grateful that he's made possible the level of comfort you now have. Your lives would be far worse if not for him. Nevertheless, as free and equal participants in this endeavor, from now on at each meeting, any worker may have 2 minutes to ask questions or voice suggestions or complaints." With that, the workers all seemed satisfied and headed out again to the fields to pick the cotton.
Day 4.
"I have a big announcement," Mr. Smith said as the daily meeting began. "Mr. Jones' cousin is here, and not just to visit and see how our project is coming along. It has been decided that from now on, you will be deciding who will manage the plantation. Of course, this job can't be done by just anyone, but every 3 months we will have a special meeting at which all the workers will vote on whether we think Mr. Jones should run the plantation or whether we think his cousin, Mr. Johnson, should run the plantation. That means that ultimately you are in charge, because you will be deciding which man you want running things on your behalf. If you don't like the way things are being managed, you now have the power to change it." Amazed and pleased, the workers headed out again to the fields to pick the cotton. Days passed, months passed, a year passed, and the plantation continued to operate as before. Sometimes Mr. Jones was in charge, sometimes Mr. Johnson was in charge, but the day-to-day routine stayed exactly the same. The workers worked hard, long hours every day, and still had little to show for it. Every day the meeting would begin with them all reciting the Jones Plantation motto, "We work together as free men for our mutual benefit, pledging our allegiance to the Jones Plantation, which stands for prosperity, liberty, and justice for all." One day Mr. Smith announced, "Samuel is asked to say a few words this morning, and whatever the rest of us may think of his ideas and opinions, we are all free here, and that means we are all allowed to speak our minds. So, Samuel, you have 2 minutes. Begin." Samuel stepped forward, looking scared. "I was excited when all this started," he began, glancing nervously at Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. "But don't you all see what's happened here? Nothing has changed. We're all still slaves." There were grumbles of disagreement from the crowd. "They tell us what to do and whip us if we don't. They still make all the rules and punish us if we disobey. They let us make suggestions and complain about things, but they never really change anything. They let us choose between Mr. Jones and Mr. Johnson, but what's the difference? The situation stays the same. We do all of the work and they take as much as they want and decide how much they'll let us keep. They live in luxury, made rich by the cotton we pick. We do all the work and have to build our own huts, grow our own food, and take care of ourselves. They leave us just enough that we don't revolt or run away. This is not freedom. We're all still slaves. They've only changed the words they use, but nothing else has changed. They say we're all free and equal, but we're not. They command and we obey. That's not freedom. That's not equality. They say we're free to leave, but all that means is that we're free to be someone else's slave. Why should we work or obey the rules? We didn't agree to this. They made the system. They forced it on us. They control and rob us and call it freedom. They've deceived you into thinking that being able to choose which slave master you'll work for is the same as being free. It's not. Open your eyes. If you keep what you produce, they call it stealing. When they take what you produce, they call it sharing and fair distribution. Can't you see that this is all? Your time is up, Samuel, Mr. Smith announced calmly. At his gesture, two supervisors grabbed Samuel by the arms and led him to the whipping post. I'm sorry, Samuel, but you've broken the rules. There are rules against encouraging others not to work and encouraging others to break the rules. You're only hurting all of us with your discontentment and your complaining and your disobedience. The whip fell and Samuel let out a grunt. Without rules, without order, all would be lost. Without law, there would be chaos. We can't just behave as wild animals, each doing whatever he pleases. We must all follow the plan and all do our duty for the betterment of everyone. And those who do not must be punished. The whip fell again and blood flowed freely from Samuel's back. Samuel, it is you who are stealing from the others. When you don't do your assigned work, you are making more work for others. When you disobey the rules, it is you who are endangering the future of everyone else here. You are the thief. You are the criminal. You are the one trying to destroy the arrangement that keeps us all safe and prosperous. At every lash of the whip, the other workers cheered louder and louder, some yelling curses at Samuel. Being spoiled and selfish, you complain about everything, talking as if you're oppressed. But you are the one ruining things. You are the one keeping us from being all we could be. It is your greed and your rebelliousness that is hurting all of us. They all play by the rules, Mr. Smith said, gesturing at the others. What makes you think that you don't have to? You think you're above the law? There were loud yells of agreement as the whip fell again. We must maintain order, Mr. Smith proclaimed, to make this plantation great, to make it so that we can all be happy and prosperous. To have the society we want, there have to be rules. We all have to contribute our fair share to this great endeavor, and we cannot tolerate actions and attitudes that seek to undermine the amazing things that together as free men we have achieved and will continue to achieve. Mr. Jones was smiling as he gave Mr. Smith a pat on the back. The crowd was cheering so loudly that none of them had noticed that Samuel had died.
What you have been taught about government and politics is no more accurate or reasonable than what Mr. Smith taught the slaves. If you're ready to look through the veil of rhetoric and propaganda to see the reality beneath, get a copy of The Most Dangerous Superstition. It will change the way you see the world.
I can't say enough about recommending that book, by the way. I'm halfway through reading it. I haven't finished it, but it's a phenomenal book. Recommended reading for every child in America, especially if you're in junior high school. I would like to ask, I hope you saw the similarities in that video. The next one is for Karen Hudis, who's an attorney for the World Bank. She's a whistleblower. She blew the whistle on the banking community and more recently the bar for what they've done. They're both guilty of enslaving humanity. Just watch this video and you'll see for yourself. Listen very carefully to the words.
What happened was in 1933, this country was declared in bankruptcy, and that's when you got all these states being incorporated, and that's when you got babies when they were given Social Security numbers and their birth certificates. You see the names are put in capital letters. That's when we lost our courts. Our courts became maritime courts, and what the Federal Reserve banksters were doing was they were making an estimate of how much tax payments over their lifetime those babies were going to be paying, and they estimated for each person it was going to be like $600,000 or $100,000, and they issued bonds. And if you look at your birth certificate and you turn it over, you'll see that there's a number on there. There's a CUSIP number. That's, they would be issuing bonds for your babies, for the future earnings. And when you go into a court, it's no longer a regular court, and you're not given your rights as a citizen. You're treated as if you were a vessel, as if you were a ship under maritime law. I couldn't believe it when I heard about this. I thought, that's impossible. I read it about 3 or 4 times, and from different people, and finally I realized, this is what's what. And when you pay your tax dollars, you're mailing your checks to a separate place. That's to the Federal Reserve System.
There was a comment that was made on one of your sites about the rule of law. What is actually the rule of law? Because our understanding is those who have the gold make the rules.
I'm sitting here smiling. I've been having a discussion with a group that wants to have citizen juries. And what I was saying to them is that, I'm not going to say that they shouldn't do that, but while they're at it, they should be going to the American Bar Association and asking that group what they're doing when they license lawyers. Because one of the things that happened in my case was the lawyers inside the World Bank took whiteout and falsified the documents and used the falsified documents. And that is a violation of the rules of professional conduct. And, it was open and shut. I could show that they had done this. And I went to the D.C. Bar, the Board on Professional Responsibility, and I asked them to discipline those lawyers, and they didn't do that. So the conclusion that Elaine and I have come to is that the licensing of lawyers should be taken away from lawyers. They're just there, helping conceal the fraud of their brethren. And they've lost the right. They're no longer up to the task. So we've got to. I'm very, very impressed at how seriously you all are, at work, and you know more than most of the lawyers. And so you and other people need to go to the American Bar Association and get those people to understand that we have come to a situation of such massive fraud and corruption that the ABA has lost all total credibility, and they should apologize to the American people for what it is that they've been doing, and they should disband. The lawyers should probably all give back their licenses. I mean, the 13th Amendment should be read from, that's the first thing that the kids in the schools need to hear. It's been a terrible scandal, and in the process of suffering ourselves, you think we've had it bad. You should see what we've done to the rest of the world. It's not a pretty picture. We need to have straightened things out to an extent that people know that we mean business in cleaning up this corruption. I mean, it's just about an impossible mission, but it absolutely has to be done. I don't know how to do it. I'm just asking you if you have any ideas how your contacts are, because we're certainly not going to get any help from the mainstream media. That's a given.
Well, see, that's why we do this show here. This show goes around the world because we have international listeners on this show. But part of what we have found out is that through the research, the Bar Association that we've done here in each state and in the federal level, bar attorneys technically under their own regulations can only operate either for corporations or for administrative personnel. There is nothing in the regulations that allows them to represent John Q. Public, but they're not licensed. All they have is a card from the Supreme Court of each state says, yeah, you're able to practice in the court, but it's not a license because the license is not through the Secretary of State like a doctor's or a nurse or a barber. They don't hold a license through the state. All they have is a bar card. That's our number one problem. This is part of the problem that we're running into because I've walked into too many courts where we've had honest attorneys that literally tried, once they knew where we stood at and knew our knowledge, they tried, and the judge reminded them of Rule 11 of disbarment. If they would consider and keep on this line, they would be disbarred. So part of it goes right back into the judges controlling the attorneys in these courtrooms. That's part of our problem.
Yes.
Hey, Rod, this is Harvey. May I ask Karen a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Karen, this is Harvey. I'm one of the worker bees for Rod's whole thing here. Earlier, you had said that there was a website, and there was a little bit of a flurry on the message board about what is the website, and you said you'd give it out if we were interested.
Yes.
In process that you were embarking on?
Okay, let me go over to my computer. I'll take my cat off my lap, and I can give you the URL for that. Yeah.
And you yourself are going through this?
Yes. And it's complicated.
I guess the question comes down to, why would it have to be this complicated? Because if the courts know, the judges know, the prosecutor knows, and technically your attorney, the public defender, the one you hire, they know this secret that they're bringing you in as a vessel. Why do we have to jump through these hoops to expose this? Oh,
no. Exposing it, you can do it whichever way you want. But if you want to release yourself from as a ship, so that you're no longer a surety for that bond that's been issued in your name, you're like a one-person corporation. Your future earnings have been pledged. And if you want to end that legal, situation, you have to get a release.
Okay, we have talked about this throughout the years of being on our show, and, a lot of it, I understand the concept, but it still goes back in. When you walk into that courtroom, that judge knows that you are a living being and that this is done under the state of emergency, under the bankruptcy.
Right, but if you're not able to get the Congress to lift the state of emergency, then you want to be able to go into the court as a real live human being. You want to have been able to have filed those release papers. Anyway, I can give you the website. I've now found it.
Go ahead.
It's called, and it's all run together with no dots, Association for Sovereign Home Rule Within .org. And the guy who's been doing this for me is a fellow named Chris Strunk.
Let me ask you a question. Now, if somebody was to approach you 10 years ago and bring this up to you, what would have been your first impression?
Before I knew about all of this?
Yes.
My first reaction was that it wouldn't be valid because, one of the questions I didn't answer is, what do I consider to be rule of law? Yeah. And when you've got this secret game going on that nobody knows about, that's not rule of law. If people don't know about it, if the judges are crossing their fingers and putting, yellow fringe on a flag and duping people, and people don't know about it, that's not really rule of law. It couldn't be law. But as I spent more and more time seeing how this was done and why it was done, and this whole big what can you call it? It's a scam. It's a world scam. I was in a way, when I found this out, and I couldn't believe it, and it took me a lot of time, and I ran into people that were telling me the same things, and finally I said, well, I don't want to believe it. It goes against my grain. I don't want to believe that all of these lawyers and the American Bar Association are pulling a fast one on everybody like this, but I have no choice. That's the way it is. If that's the way it is, I'd rather admit it, that that's the way it is, than sit there and be a dupe. and I think everybody, and that's why it's going to be so difficult, is to get everybody to understand this, is because it's, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm not intimidated by this kind of, gobbledygook in the language. When somebody comes at me with this kind of, it's all, the language. If you read what Chris Strunk has done to release yourself from this, it's just they did it that way on purpose to make it almost impossible to understand and almost impossible to undo. I mean, it's kind of like you're putting landmines in a field so people can't get through. That's what this is. It's that kind of lawyering, and nothing makes me madder than that kind of lawyering. I think we have two questions. The first question is, what do we do until we've got this thing straightened out? And what you're talking about is, yes, that's what we should do. But we've got to get it straightened out. And I think it's definitely doable. When I say straightened out, I'm talking about all of the countries of the world, all 188 members of the Bretton Woods institutions, to say this is a system that benefits those bankers. We know who they are. We know how they've bribed the politicians in our countries. But we are all onto them. And if enough people in the world find out about this, it's not going to continue.
Well, see, that's part of what we've been trying to do, is education on the level of getting people educated, going out to these people and bringing it in. But it's like the sheriff sit here and tell me whenever I sit down and talk to them, so we understand what you're saying, but we have an attorney that comes in here and dictates how we're supposed to do it. Regardless of what you're saying is right, that attorney dictates to us. That's where the issue is. If we can get to them to start educating them and getting them to turn around and being, let's get back on the rule of law here. Let's get back of what they raised their right hand to uphold, defend, protect, and get back in what the law actually is. But again, as long as you got the law enforcement and as long as you got the attorneys and the judges on that side of the fence, that's where the problem lies. We got to get to the Bar Association to get them to turn around. That's where the issue really lies.
I've been dealing with those Bar Association people. I've got a meeting tomorrow with the International Law Association in New York, and I'm in Maryland right now, so I've got to try to figure out how to get myself sorted out so I can do that. So I'm not going to be able to continue this call that much longer.
That's good. That's good. Well, I'm glad we had.
But let's. Those people are, they're earning so much money by being crooked and defending those people and feeling good about it. I just despair. I don't see the progress coming from there. I see it coming from the people that won't let them license other lawyers anymore. I see it coming from the people, for them. I don't see it coming from them reforming themselves.
Okay. I hope you got that. Slavery was not done away with by Lincoln. Today in America, we are all unaware, willing participants in slavery. It continues to go on. Read the book, like she suggested, The Most Dangerous Superstition. It's a phenomenal book. Kids should read it too. Thank you for watching, and I hope you gained something from this. Slavery's still alive.